I'm very happy today to introduce to you Dr. Dave Burrows. Let me say some few things about him. These are leadership positions that he have handled, and some of it he graduated from, some of it he's still currently doing. But I'm just, for the sake of time, gonna go through some of those business and professional accomplishments and positions that he have handled. Of course, he is a author, and he's a husband of one wife. He's currently the senior pastor of Bahamas Faith Ministries, which is the position that he took over from Dr. Myles Munroe. He have worked as Chief Information Officer of the BFMI group of companies, and also he have served as Vice President of the business enterprise of BFMI, and also Director for Small Business Center, Ministry of Youth and Sports. And this is now in the Bahamas, as he have also served in the capacity of youth development for the Bahamas government, and also Christian Youth Leadership Network as a president and founder. And also he was also a founder of and president of the International Third World Youth Leaders Association, and also is the chairman of the Bahamas Government Youth Advisory Council on 3 occasions. So that's what he does. And he was telling me that recently he's appointed by a government in the Caribbean to deal with issues of crime prevention and stuff like that at government and country level. So we are very excited about his accomplishment. And also board of directors of Safe Bahamas is always very much for the youth and for safety of nations. And he have helped to de-gang a lot of gangs in the Bahamas as it deals with youth, and also a secretary board of directors for Bahamas Faith Ministries, and the founder of Faith Live Book and Music Center, and president and CEO of Megabyte Computers, which is the business that he and his wife led and founded. And also he's a president and CEO of One Rib Publications. This is the company which does the publications of books and so on. And also he had served as vice president of the Myles Munroe International, and the list go on. But ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome, and he's back in South Africa because we have got the global leadership, the Kingdom Global Leadership Summit here in South Africa starting on Thursday next week, which we are hosting, taking place here at Men Lane, Maine. So that is one of the reasons why he is currently in the country. So he's addressing us from Pretoria tonight, from our capital city. And of course, he have written a number of books, the Transformational Leadership Lessons, and this is a tribute to Dr. Myles Munroe. All these books that I'm just introducing quickly to you, you will be able to find them from our bookstore. And also you have written a book called The Laws of Good Success. Good success. That tells us that there is a success which is bad. So if you want to know all about that, please get this book. And also he have written a leadership book for the youth. It's called Leadership Lessons for Youth, Kingdom Perspective in Handling That. And also he wrote a book called The Kingdom Ambassadors. So these books will also be available at our conference this coming week. And one of the recent books that we have just written for the countries and nations, it's how you can reach it's called Reaching the Streets. And of course, these are lessons on reaching and impacting the troubled youth from the streets and gangs. And you have done a lot of that in his life. So all these books and more, you'll be able to find it from our bookstore here. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to you Dr. David Burrows, all the way from Nassau, Bahamas. But tonight, here in our capital city of Pretoria.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity. If I may, I would like to share my screen so that I can share my presentation with you. If somebody can help me with that.
You can go ahead, sir.
Okay, let's go ahead. Okay, so everyone can see the screen, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, as I said, it's a great pleasure to be with you and to meet so many of you, even though it is by Zoom. And I count it a pleasure to have this opportunity to share with you on managing succession and transition. So I want to begin, as you follow me on the screen, by talking about the principle of succession. In this image on the screen, this is Dr. Munroe and myself. Dr. Munroe and I developed a relationship when I was in college. He was senior to me. He was about 4 years ahead of me. And I had just come off of the streets, being involved in the world of criminal activity and so on. And he became my mentor. It was through this relationship that I became involved with Bahamas Faith Ministries, because he asked me to join him when he returned to the Bahamas in founding Bahamas Faith Ministries. So I was a co-founder. I was the youngest co-founder, but I was a co-founder nevertheless. Now, let's begin by talking about what is succession. It's important to know what exactly we are talking about in order to effectively determine what is the process and best practices when it comes to succession. Succession is the act of assuming a title or responsibility of a position right after the person who had the title has retired, left, died, or is no longer able to have it. So that's the dictionary definition of succession. And then we have to understand about succession is that succession is different from replacement. Sometimes people feel like in order to succeed somebody, you have to replace them. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that as we go on, but you cannot replace someone. You can succeed someone, but you cannot replace a human being. So my job was never to replace Dr. Myles Munroe. It was to follow in his footsteps. You cannot even fill a person's shoes. Many persons came to me and they said, Pastor Dave, you have big shoes to fill. I said, no, I don't. I have my own shoes I have to walk in, but I can walk in his footsteps. Even identical twins are not replicas, so you cannot replace an individual. Everyone is unique with their own personality. And then we come to the word transition. Transition means the process or period of changing from one state or condition to another. For example, students in transition from one level of school to another. So succession and transition are two very important things. I want to begin with an analysis and some statistics about succession. It is a fact that only 10% of small business owners, this is statistics from the United States, only 10% of small business owners have a formal written succession plan. Only 38 have an informal unwritten succession plan. The remaining 52% do not have any succession plan at all. Only about 30% of family businesses survive into the second generation. 12 are still viable into the third generation, and only 3% of family businesses operate into the fourth generation. The reason why this is important is because it tells you of the value of succession planning. Less than 35% of churches have a succession plan, which of course results in church splits because a successor was not identified. And right now in the Bahamas, as we speak, I can think of a number of churches that are going through either splits or fissures because of this lack of succession planning. It also causes a lot of legal battles, church wars, members being divided, people going to court. You had situations where the former pastor's wife's car was repossessed without notice. And then you have delays. So a church remains in limbo and indecision for a long time because of a lack of succession planning. And then there's another aspect of it, the uncertainty about it. So you're not sure, the members are not sure. No one knows exactly what's going to happen. So why does this happen? This primarily happens because there is a lack of principles and systems. In order to have successful transition and succession, there needs to be principles and systems in place before the time of a changeover of leadership. Let me give you some examples. So you have to have systems and you have to have provisions. You have to have clear organizational charts and job descriptions. Many churches feel like if you have an organizational chart, if you have job descriptions, if you have policy, that it's a business. However, in many aspects, there's a part of the church that is a business. And if someone is going to stay in business, they need to have the right policies. These include financial policies and structure. So most people fail when it comes to succession and transition because they don't have the systems in place. Remember, I said earlier, sometimes we equate succession with replacement. Since no one can be replaced, then we have to focus on how to follow a leader. I'm actually working on a book right now, and the book is called Following a Legend. And it really describes my journey in following Dr. Myles Munroe. In my case, I had to ask the question, how does one follow a global icon? Someone with a massive personality, a massive reach. How do you follow someone like that? The first thing that is very important is to remember to ensure to let people know that you are not the replacement. One of the things that can happen whenever transition and succession is taking place is that people expect the new leader to replace the old leader. The problem with that is that you cannot replace an individual and you cannot replace a personality. Each leader has their own personality. They have their own individual traits. They have their own strengths and weaknesses. And so at the very beginning, people need to know you are not the replacement. One of my first statements I made to the church at Bahamas Faith Ministries is that we have lost the visionary, but we have not lost the vision. Very important. You can lose a visionary, but it doesn't mean you have to lose a vision. So if the organization is going to continue successfully, then it has to have something substantive beyond the founding personality. So principle number one of succession is vision. In the book of Habakkuk, it says, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me. And I will answer when I am corrected. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision down and make it plain on tablets that he may run who reads it. So God even told them to write it down on an iPod. He said tablets. So write the vision down and make it plain so that he may run who reads it. So the reason for a vision is that the person who is running the next leg of the race, they don't have to figure out what to do. It's already written down. It's already plain. All they have to do is follow. And follow is a very important word, because when there is a vision, you don't have to start over again. You know, some persons came to me when I succeeded Dr. Myles Munroe, and they said, what is the new vision? And I told them there is no new vision. There may be new methods, there may be adjusted plans, but there's no new vision. When we began, our vision consisted of two things: transforming followers into leaders and leaders into agents of change. That never changed. Our vision also revolved around the message of the kingdom. So that vision never changed. So the most important component of succession is vision. Success begins with a vision. The Bible says, without a vision, people will perish. And it needs to be very, very clear. One of the lessons that I learned from Dr. Munroe many years ago was that many times we would go into meetings, and the meetings would be with our regular staff members and our leaders, and he would begin every meeting by talking about the vision. And so one day I said to him, I used to call him Chief. I said, Chief, everybody already knows the vision. You know, we don't necessarily need to repeat it in every meeting. And he said to me, he said, that's the mistake you're making. He said, never assume that people know the vision. And even when people know the vision, they need to be constantly renewed and reminded of the vision, because the vision guides you. So one of the things that I began to understand is that we are where we are and we were where we were because of a vision. And a vision is a powerful thing. And in any succession planning, it has to revolve around vision. So the next thing that we need to remember is that we have to ensure that people follow a vision and not a personality. One of the challenges of following a global icon is that people are looking for a replacement. So sometimes people would come to me and they would say to me, Dr. Munroe used to do it like this. And they would say, you know, this is the way, almost intimating that this is the way it should be done. So, and they were expecting his personality. So I had to let our congregation, I had to let our associates know from the very beginning, I am not Dr. Myles Munroe. I am a co-founder of the vision. I understand the vision very clearly. I was appointed and selected by God to continue the vision. And so the vision is going to continue, but the personality of Dr. Munroe will no longer be here. He cannot be replaced. And if we try to replace him, we will be continually looking into the rearview mirror. And that is not something that he would have wanted. We can become successors, and it does not always have to be on an individual basis. If you think about succession only on an individual basis, then it means that you are trying to replace. Sometimes succession is individual, sometimes it's collective. Let me give you an example. Jesus was succeeded by 12 disciples. He was never replaced. Even though the Catholic Church has a pope. The pope cannot possibly replace Jesus. So Jesus was succeeded by 12 individuals who he taught the vision. These 12 individuals, they knew about the kingdom. They knew about the vision. So collectively, they succeeded him. So Jesus was succeeded collectively. Now let's look further at some of the principles of succession and transition. A principle is a rule, a law or law of nature, a fundamental assumption, a moral rule, the main way of doing something. So there are principles of succession. And one of the things that we have to understand is we have to go by principle because there is no template. You cannot pull out a template and say, this is how succession takes place in every instance. I'm going to give you some example. Many of you would have known of Joel Osteen. You would know Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen succeeded his father, John Osteen. But his succession was very unusual. He had no interest in the ministry in terms of preaching. He was one who was operating in the background. He was not identified and prepared as the successor, but he became the successor because he knew the vision and he was in place. And his skill set and his leadership ability was discovered in the process. Another example is the Walton family from Walmart. When the father died, the business fluctuated. When the founder of Disney died, Disney declined. When the founder of Microsoft left the organization, it became stagnant. When the founder of Honda died, they achieved their greatest innovations. When the founder of Sony died, they lost market share. So you can see that there are varied results and there are many different eventualities that cause succession and impact succession. Now let's just look at some of the types of succession. So you can have circumstantial succession or you can have planned succession. What is circumstantial succession? Circumstantial succession is similar to what happened in my case. I was a co-founder of Bahamas Faith Ministries. I knew the vision. I was capable of leading the organization, but I was not planning it. I was not planning to lead. Even though there were points in time when Dr. Munroe had requested of me. He requested me to consider leading the organization when he transitioned. However, at that time, I was involved in, even though I was a part of Bahamas Faith Ministries, part of the leadership team, I was also traveling and doing consulting work in many countries of the world and in the Bahamas. So it wasn't something that I was already planning for. It was a circumstantial succession. The circumstances caused me to be put in place. And then there is planned succession. Planned succession is when a particular time period is given. So the successor is identified, and then the succession period is identified. For example, if someone said, my successor is John Brown, and the succession period is 1.5 years from now. So that's a planned succession. So you can have both. This is the reason why we must focus on principles versus a template, because not all succession happens according to plan, but there are principles that govern succession that can cause us to be successful every time. Students of leadership say that companies that navigate the transition most successfully are those that embed the founder's values in the organization and groom multiple generations of leaders. This is from the Wall Street Journal. So it's saying that the companies that are most successful are those that focus on the founder's value or the vision of the organization and groom a number of leaders. Another reason we must be principle-based is to preserve an organization and vision in the absence of the founder. If you are based upon personality, popularity, individual accolades, then you will be challenged when the founder or leader is no longer there. However, if you operate based upon principles, it preserves an organization. Principles and vision preserve an organization. To transition effectively, it is important that you must have the original vision and blueprint. The vision needs to be emphasized because visions extend beyond lifetimes. Every human being has a limited lifespan, but visions can carry on for generations. We know that the vision that Jesus implemented, called the ecclesia, or the called out ones, has been in existence for over 2,000 years, and it's still going strong in spite of changes of leadership personalities. So this original vision becomes the driving force. Visions can survive personalities, but in order for visions to survive personalities, the successor must be a strong individual who is familiar with the original vision and who has the leadership ability to steer people in the right direction. If a leader is weak, if he is unfamiliar with the vision, if he is unsure of himself, he's going to have many, many issues and battles. One of the things that happened when I succeeded Dr. Munroe at Bahamas Faith Ministries is that there were many voices who wanted to advise. There were many voices who wanted to suggest the way things should be. I had to tell everybody that there's a vision already established. I am currently the leader. And so everybody needs to find their place in the vision, not try to instruct the leader on how the vision is supposed to operate. So you have to be very strong. In fact, if we recall, when Joshua was succeeding Moses, God made a statement 3 times to him. He said, "Be strong and courageous." And then he said, "Only be strong and courageous." And then he said a 3rd time, "You must be strong and courageous." So what that means is that when you are the leader who is succeeding, especially a powerful and iconic individual, you have to have courage. And courage may mean making some very difficult decisions. One of the things that I had to do when I assumed leadership is evaluate the organization and determine where we were at, what skills were available, who worked best going forward. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I had to release some persons. I had to introduce new leaders. I had to refine the vision for the next generation. And environments may have changed in between that period of time. So for example, there were new elements in the atmosphere when I took over as leader from Dr. Myles Munroe. Technology was advancing, and so I had to learn how to incorporate a number of new things into the vision. Another example is that the way church had been done and the way church is being done began to change. You had online church. You had a different demographic, a younger demographic that was not as attached to church as the older demographic. So all of these things had to be amalgamated, and then I had to communicate that continually and reinforce it because we were in a period of change. And by the way, one of the good things that happened is as a result of the refinements that I made in the first year after Dr. Munroe passed away, we grew by 15%. Many of my friends who were pastors and who had gone through leadership transitions, they came to me and they said, this is impossible. One gentleman told me his church had 800 members, and when the senior pastor retired, 600 people left the church. So we have to be very focused, and we have to be very strong and very courageous and willing to make tough decisions. Never take communication of the vision for granted or assume that key people understand the vision. So I had to refine and repeat the vision to another generation. I had to put people in place based upon their skill set and their suitability for the next phase. Very important. I want to give you some examples of the power of a vision and when things can fall apart when the original vision is lost. I come from the business world, and I own a computer company. And so I am familiar with most of the computer industry, the technology industry. And one interesting case study was the study of Apple computers. Apple was an innovative organization, and their original vision, Steve Jobs, the founder, made a statement, and this was a theme for Apple computers. He said, think different. There were many computer companies, but Apple always stayed ahead of the game because they thought and they innovated differently. Their products didn't look like anybody else. They didn't wait for somebody else to develop something and then respond. They thought differently. Now, what happened was that when Steve Jobs left the company, or he was actually fired from his own company, a new CEO came in, and he was the CEO of Pepsi Cola. And he did not understand the culture. And his philosophy was more like think same than think differently. Steve Jobs said, we don't wear suits. Our products are colorful. They're different. We package differently. But John Scully came in and he made Apple look like every other computer company. And they almost went out of business. The comeback for Apple happened when the original vision and visionary returned to the company. So that's very important. Remember that the vision is bigger than the visionary, but without the vision, people will perish and an organization will perish. Visionaries have an appointed time, but visions are perpetual. If you look at the life of Jesus and you look at his leadership methodology, he constantly repeated the vision to the disciples. He would say things like this: the kingdom of God is like this. He would make statements like this. He would say, and it shall not be so among you. In other words, he was telling them, you have to think differently because I am introducing a new vision. And you would have noted that he took 3 years of constantly repeating the vision to the disciples until they got it. The kingdom of God was repeatedly emphasized. He said to them, seek first the kingdom. He said, except a man be born again, he shall not see the kingdom. He said, the kingdom of God is like a great prize or a great pearl. And he just kept emphasizing the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom. And so the disciples, they were inundated with kingdom principles so that when he left, they were already prepared for succession. In the same way, it's similar to what Dr. Myles Munroe did with myself and other key leaders. We got the vision. We heard it repeated, and we understood it. Make sure your key people and successors understand the vision. It is a terrible thing to have somebody to come in to lead an organization who does not know the vision. You must know the vision. It doesn't matter how much skills you have, whatever you have, you must know the vision. A vision is so powerful that men can be dead for 50 years and we continually refer to their vision. We remember the statement Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." He was really talking about a vision. He said, "This is my vision for Black people in America." And that vision is still resonating today. The refrain that we all know from Dr. Munroe is this: transforming followers into leaders and leaders into agents of change. So we know as an organization that we are a leadership organization. And that's why we focus in on transforming and developing leaders into agents of change. We remember these words even if we never met or had a close relationship with the author. So the vision is the most important thing. You don't have to meet Martin Luther King Jr. to be familiar with the vision. You don't have to meet Dr. Myles Munroe to be familiar with the vision, because the vision is so powerful, it goes beyond the life of the visionary. In succession planning, we must remember to pass on the vision, but not necessarily the wardrobe. Let me repeat that. Remember to pass on the vision, but not necessarily the wardrobe. So sometimes in this process, persons, in our case, they may have expected me to wear the same clothes. And I'm not talking about physical clothes. I'm talking about similar traits and personalities and ways of doing things. All of that is wardrobe. You pass on the vision, but each successor, their wardrobe is going to look different. If we remember the case of Saul and David, Saul wanted David to fight in his wardrobe. And David said, "Look, I can't wear your clothes. If I wear your clothes, I will not be me." So we have to pass on the vision and not the wardrobe. Number two, and I need someone to indicate to me because I don't have a clock in front of me what my time looks like. Principle number two, identification. Very important. We have to identify the gifts and talents of key people. As a leader, you have to constantly observe your key people and identify the gifts and talents and see like a coach. When a coach has a team, he looks at them during practice and he sees who has varying skills, and he determines where they will play based upon their skill set. A visionary leader has to do the same thing. Identify the talents and the gifts of key people. And you watch your team to determine what is the best fit. When I succeeded Dr. Munroe, I looked at my team and I began to see that some people fit who were not there before. So for example, as some of my leaders became older, I realized that I had some younger leaders who had the same skill set, but they were more in touch with this generation and they had a better technological background. So if you have a leader and you're going into a generation that thrives on technology, and that leader does not have an email address, or they don't have a smartphone. Now, some people may say, well, that's not necessary. But the truth of the matter is, in the world that we live in today, people live with their phones. So we have to do that as well. Expect duplication of vision and values. Do not expect duplication. Expect duplication of vision and values, but do not expect duplication of personality or methodology. Make sure you make note of that. Recognize your own fallibility and mortality. We all have flaws. We all have shortcomings. So we have to lead with the understanding that we have to use our foresight and insight to recognize our own fallibilities and plan with the understanding that there may be people on our team who are strong in what we are weak in. Principle number 3, development and refinement. Very important. We need to assist our team in developing and refining their gifts. This is very important. One of the things that happened with Dr. Munroe and myself is that he mentored me and guided me in stages. I remember one day he said to me, because I was very rough and raw, at that time they used to call me the roughneck pastor, and I had my speech was very rough. And he said to me, he said, Dave, I need you to refine your gift, because when you refine your gift, more people at higher levels are going to call on you. So we have to assist our team members and our key leaders in refining and developing their gifts. There was a movie I saw many, many years ago. Some of you may not be old enough to remember this movie, but the movie was called The Karate Kid, not the one with Will Smith's son, the original one, Mr. Miyagi. Wax on, wax off. In this story, Mr. Miyagi was the mentor, and he had the young protege doing things, and the protege wanted an explanation. But he was teaching him a lesson, and if he gave him too much information, he would not succeed. So he brought it to him in stages. And you have to train even when it is not obvious to the trainee. So sometimes you ask your key leaders to do something and they don't understand why you're asking them, but you are training them without saying, I'm training you. Principle number 4, opportunity. This is very important. Provide opportunities for successes to sit in your seat or seats of power. One of the things that many church leaders do is that they hold on to power very tightly and they don't give opportunities for their possible successes. You cannot be so insecure as to believe that if you allow somebody an opportunity, it's going to detract from who you are. We have to create avenues for them to release their gifts. Allow them to shine in their field. I remember I had a conversation with Dr. Munroe, and he said something to me that was very important. I was considering writing a book. Some of my friends who were youth pastors of some of the largest churches in the world, they said their pastor did not want them to write a book. But Dr. Munroe said to me, he said, you have an expertise that I don't have, and the world needs what you have. And so he allowed me to shine in my field. And that was very critical. If you want people to stick around, you have to provide opportunities for them to excel in their gift. You cannot expect people to stick around and they not have opportunities, because each of us are individuals and we are designed not to be employed, but we are designed to be deployed. We may be employed for a season, but at some point in time, we are deployed into our destiny. When Dr. Munroe passed away, there was a lady, she was from somewhere in Africa. I think she might have been living in the United States. And she came by my table and she made a powerful statement that I didn't think about before. She looked at my table. She looked at the books that I had written. At that time, I had written about 13 or 14 books. And she said to me, she said, you know, I have always marveled on the fact that Dr. Munroe allowed you to write so many books, to travel extensively. And she said, when I look at you, I realize that he covered you, but he didn't smother you. And sometimes leaders have a tendency to smother their successes rather than cover them. Very important principle. Good mentors prepare mentees for success by taking them along and involving them in their world. I'll give you another example of this. Early on in ministry, as I began to develop as a youth pastor, Dr. Munroe would take me on the road with him, and no matter the capacity of the church and the name of the church and how big the ministry was, he would say, I want y'all to, I want my youth pastor, Pastor Dave, to come and share with you for 10 minutes before I speak. And sometimes I would be thinking to myself, well, you know, it's already late and, you know, you have to speak. Why would you want to put me on to speak before? Well, what he was doing is he was preparing me and he was helping me to refine my gifts. He was involving me into his world. And I'm not sure if he was thinking that one day I might be in the position that I am. That's possible. He also encouraged evaluation. Evaluate your key people with a view to strategic placement based upon their identified strengths. You have to continually evaluate people. Someone may begin and they may be the strongest person that you've identified, but later on, as you find out that this person may not be as strong as I thought. And that can only happen as these. Here are some things that I want you to remember. We have to train, we have to test, we have to try, and we have to evaluate. We have to train, test, try, and evaluate. When you train people, you give them opportunities so that they can be tested. You allow them, you give them a try in leadership positions, and then you evaluate them, and then you make a decision. Principle number 6, deployment. Always seek to deploy rather than employ. An employee works for someone. Someone who is being deployed, they work with someone. Make sure that your team is working with you, not for you. They can be employed by you, but with a vision for deployment. And do not wait for perfection to deploy. Sometimes we delay the growth of our potential successors and our proteges by waiting for them to be completely refined. Sometimes you have to give people an opportunity, even though you know they have shortcomings. And so you avoid either extreme, putting them in too early or putting them in too late. So always seek to deploy rather than employ. Deploy means to position in readiness for combat. You want to release people into their destiny rather than retain them for service. So they may be serving you, but they are serving you to be released into destiny. Develop people who do not need you. This is a very powerful one. And this sometimes is the one that leaders struggle with. You want people who have developed under you to the point where they don't need you. One of the reasons why I was able to easily transition to succeed Dr. Myles Munroe is because I did not need him. I was already running. I was around the globe. And so he had deployed me into my destiny. It just so happens that man's plans and God's plans are different. I was prepared to succeed, but I was already being deployed in another arena. The best person to succeed you is not the one who is dependent upon you, because after you are gone, they will keep looking for you. You need someone who is not dependent upon you. We have to create partnerships, not dependency. Sometimes leaders create dependency. And so some of their possible successes cannot think without them. Produce people who understand the responsibility that comes with independence and freedom. Freedom is the liberty to fulfill your assignment and pursue your purpose and destiny. Freedom is not the absence of restraint or rules. So when a person becomes truly free, they learn to operate within a prescribed boundary. You can be delivered and not free. We see that with the children of Israel. They were delivered, not free. Freedom is not a physical state. Nelson Mandela, his release date was 1994, but freedom came a long time before that date. I remember visiting the Apartheid Museum and hearing the story about how he made peace with his enemies in prison, and how he came up with the quote where he said, "Unforgiveness is like feeding yourself poison and hoping your enemy will die." He came to a point where he was free because freedom is an internal condition, not an external event. Freedom requires more responsibility than slavery, and the demands of freedom are higher. So in a successor, you want someone who understands freedom. You cannot look back to the comfort of others making decisions for you. I remember the week that Dr. Munroe passed away, I returned to the church. And when I returned to the church, his car was not there. Dr. Pinder's car was not there. I went up to my office, and several offices around me, no one was there. And some decisions needed to be made. And normally when I was making critical decisions, I would go in Dr. Munroe's office and I would say, "Chief, what do you think?" The chief was no longer there. And I could not look back to him to make decisions. So now I had to be capable of making my own decisions. So if I had not achieved freedom and the ability to be responsible, I would have been handicapped. Freedom is not working for, freedom is working with. And freedom means responsibility. This is a statement from Dr. Myles Munroe. He said, self-determination under a set of rules that ensure stability. This is what freedom is. The power to choose between alternatives. And the final principle I want to leave with you is wisdom. Knowledge comes out of books. Wisdom comes from God. You never want to hand off to somebody who's not already running. In my case, the handoff was not complicated because I was already in the race and I was already running full speed. You should also prepare more than one individual for succession. You don't necessarily have to have multiple successes, but you have to have multiple individuals capable of succeeding. Make sure that you have more than one capable person, because if that one person you identify, if something happens to them or if they sabotage the vision, then you're stuck. Do not throw the baton at your successor and do not drop it on the ground. You have to hand it over. When you look at a relay race, what happens in a relay race? In the relay race, the one who is handing off the baton is at full speed. They are looking ahead. The one who is about to receive the baton gets in stride, and it is handed off at full speed. You don't want to try to hand off to somebody who is not capable of running at your pace, and you don't want to drop it on the ground. You have to hand off properly. You cannot kill a vision, but you can let it die. You cannot kill an idea, but you can ignore it and it will die. If you want your vision to die, then don't plan for succession and transition. If you want it to live, then you must have a succession plan and a plan for transition. Remember that succession requires courage. There's no one to fall back on or no one to lean on. You have to take ownership and responsibility. One of the things that I had to do was I had to be very courageous. Sometimes when you have a change of leadership, you have many people who do not understand the vision and who believe that they know who should be successor, that they know who should do what, and so on. And sometimes these people try to interfere with the process. I remember one of the first things that I told my congregation when Dr. Munroe passed away. I said, no one will have a microphone unless I approve it. Because if you have the wrong person speaking, who's not qualified to speak, they can in turn disrupt your transition. So I told the congregation, I said, in this period of time, if anybody is going to prophesy, if anybody is going to give a word, I have to know who they are, and I have to know their understanding and the vision during this season, because it's a very critical season of transition. And sometimes you have people who have their own agenda. And I discovered along the way that there were people who wanted to say things. They were itching for the microphone so that they could say something And when I found out what they wanted to say, it would have created havoc. Another thing that I did very early on in the transition is I told my congregation that we have to remember, we never want to forget, we never want to lack appreciation. We want to honor our founder, but we must continue. So we cannot ignore one or the other. We have to remember, we have to honor, but we have to continue because life must go on. As I said before, these are the words of God to Joshua. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, go over this Jordan, and you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to you, children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your feet will tread on, I have given you. As I have said to Moses, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea towards the going down of the sun, shall be your tip of your life. And then he goes on to say, be strong and of good courage. And then he goes on again to say, be strong and courageous. And later on, he says, only be strong and courageous. Successes in transition must provide assurance. We have to, one of the things that I had to do was to assure the people. I had to create focus so that people don't get distracted. I had to produce order and alignment, because when any tragedy happens, it can shake the foundation of an organization. So you have to restore order and alignment and make sure everybody is aligned properly. And then you have to give marching orders. People need to know their specific assignment. Otherwise, they will try to determine what their assignment is. And sometimes you have to have redeployment of existing soldiers. So some people's roles may change. I told some of my older leaders, I am transitioning you from player to coach. And so they understood. And then we have to execute the mandate, all the while providing inspiration and motivation. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. And I understand that we have an opportunity for some questions. These are some of my materials that Charlie mentioned earlier: leadership lessons, the laws of good success, kingdom ambassadors, reaching the streets, which is directed towards troubled youth and gang members, leadership lessons for youth, starting and running a business, etc. So thank you very much.
Marketplace with Charles Ngobeni.